Good morning. This hearing of the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, entitled The Future of Farming, Technological Innovations, Opportunities, and Challenges for Producers, will come to order. Thank you for joining us today. Yesterday, the full committee held a productive discussion on how technology is influencing specialty crop production. Today, our subcommittee will explore how promising new information technologies and the increasing utilization of data in agriculture is influencing the future of farming. It's a critical time for everyone involved in production agriculture as we face tough choices ahead. Given tight margins and a continued slump in the prices at farm gate, even routine day-to-day decision-making can determine whether the farmer will turn an annual profit. These challenges in farm country underscore the importance of the decisions we make in the next Farm Bill, which we will have to write with fewer resources than we had the last go-around. But as we begin to answer the tough questions, one thing's clear: for farmers and policymakers alike, technology plays an undeniably important role in how we address these challenges. The decisions we make surrounding data and agriculture technology will decide the future of farming in America and impact producers for years to come as technologies continue to expand and evolve. This is the third hearing we've held in the last year and a half related to big data, and the ground is already quickly shifting. Big data is influencing planning decisions and optimizing yields. It gives farmers tools to more accurately assess soil health and water usage, and it's even cutting down on labor costs. Farmers are also quickly learning that smart investments in new technology will not only make them more efficient, but will also conserve resources and ensure their land will remain productive for generations to come. Finally, big data is making USDA farm programs more accurate, efficient, and easier for farmers to navigate. But while cutting-edge technology promises many benefits, there are also significant challenges to overcome. There continue to be considerable uncertainty in the legal and regulatory landscape. Farmers are justifiably concerned about the privacy and security of their data, while questions loom over data ownership. Inadequate rural broadband access is also a significant barrier for farmers who lack the high-speed internet needed to take full advantage of the innovations we're discussing today. And as the industry continues to make investments in its future, the federal government must keep pace to modernize and adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Our distinguished witnesses here with us today will present some of the promising benefits of big data in agriculture, and will also enlighten us about how they are tackling the many challenges they're facing. I look forward to hearing their views as we assess the role of government in the modernization of agriculture. I believe this is key to ensuring that America remains the most abundant and affordable supplier of food and fiber in the world. I'd now like to recognize my friend, the ranking member from Minnesota, Mr. Nolan, for any comments he'd like to make.
Can you hear me? No, there we go. I had it covered up. Thank you, Chairman Crawford, for getting me turned on here, if you'll pardon the expression. But thank the other members of the committee, the subcommittee here, for holding this important hearing and regarding the future of farming and the opportunities and the challenges presented by data technology innovations. And thanks to the great panel of witnesses that we have here. We thank you for coming. We have an old saying, a couple of old sayings around this town. One is, you better come to town and make a case for yourself, because if you don't, there's a possibility that this town might not know you exist. Worse yet, if they know you exist and you don't show up, they might think you don't care. So thank you for taking the time to be here, and you should know that the proceedings and the knowledge and the information garnered here will end up going far beyond the members of this committee and our staffs. It's reviewed and paid attention to by policy makers and thinkers and advocates, not just in this country, but all over the world. So your testimony is very, very important here today. And the other old admonition is that in this town, if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu, and you don't want to be there. So welcome. The fact is that technology innovations have greatly benefited our farm economy. My gosh, when I was first elected to the Congress, if you got 80, 90 bushels an acre of corn, you were an all-star. And nowadays, why, it's like, get out of town, you know, where have you been? We quadruple yields, not just for corn, but so many of the other important commodities that have not only helped feed America, but have helped feed, in many cases, a starving and a hungry world. So agriculture has played such an incredibly important role in our economy and in the world economy. More recently, farmers have become more efficient with those crop yields, as I mentioned, do a better job of protecting the environment and innovation there through the use of data technologies. And while we've undoubtedly seen great benefits from these innovations, there are also important questions we must answer related to ownership of data collected on farms, as well as its security and its privacy. So we must also assure that access to information is balanced, does not allow for the manipulation of markets, as we have sometimes seen in the past. Some of us may remember how clever the Russians were back in the 70s at manipulating our farm markets. Not to imply any parallels with what's happening today. But finally, we must continue to invest in rural America broadband to ensure that our producers have the ability to receive and to send data at acceptable speeds and affordable prices. High-speed broadband is not unlike what the REA and the Rural Telephone Administration were for past generations. If you don't have the latest communications capabilities, you're out of luck. You're not going to grow. You're not going to prosper. You're not going to be able to fully communicate and participate in all that America has to offer. American agriculture might be entering a new era because of these data technologies, but we need to make sure farmers and rural communities benefit from these innovations as well. So with that said, I'm looking forward to your testimony. I know all the other members of the subcommittee are looking forward to your testimony as well. And once again, I thank Chairman Crawford for holding this important hearing. Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We have 4 distinguished witnesses with us here today, and I'll introduce each one of those. But first, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas to introduce our first witness, Mr. Arrington. Cotton Eye Jody, you are recognized.
There's a story to that, but I'll spare you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my honor to introduce to you a fellow West Texan and a friend from my hometown of Lubbock, Texas, Billy Tiller. He's a 4th-generation ag producer. He's got his accounting degree from the greatest university in the land, Texas Tech University. He's been on a bank board. And as a CPA, he understands the business of agriculture, and he certainly has a unique perspective on industry profitability and those challenges as an ag lender and what they present to our ag lenders. He's an entrepreneur, and he's been involved in ag technology startup companies, where I met him as Vice Chancellor for Research and Technology Commercialization at Texas Tech. He and his wife, Crystal, are parents of 4 children and 5 grandchildren. We got to visit before this hearing, and I said, "What do you want me to say about your background?" He said, 2 things. You know, I'm a cotton farmer. And that's what he's most proud to be known as a cotton farmer. He said, if you're going to do something to help the cotton farmers, I'm in. If you're not, I'm not going to be a part of it. That's my philosophy too. Billy, thank you for being here. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Gentleman yields back. I'd like to introduce Mr. Todd Jansen, President, Jansen Agricultural Law from Indianapolis, Indiana. Welcome. Ms. Deb Catherella, CEO, Independent Data Management, Hudson, Wisconsin. And finally, Mr. Roger Royce, founder of Royce Law Firm in Menlo Park, California. I would like to direct the witnesses, direct your attention to the lights in front of you, a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. It's just like driving. When you see the light is green, keep your foot on the gas. When it turns yellow, get ready to stop. And when it's red, slam on the brakes, and we'll get through this and get to our questions as quickly as we can. So having said that, I would like to recognize our first witness, Mr. Billy Tiller. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Nolan, and Jody, thank you for the introduction. I would like to add something to his introduction. In the data world, I'm about all farmers. And that's something, and the beauty is we all collect acres, we all have planting varieties, and we have seed, and we put out chemicals, and we do all these things. It's all measured against land. So if I do it in cotton, you can do it in corn, you can do it in soybeans, you can do it in specialty crops. So that's the beauty of what's going on. He's pretty well introduced me, so I'm going to jump right into what's going on here. I have a Grower Information Services Cooperative that I founded. It is a cooperative owned by growers. The idea behind it was to create value and control for the grower. Because what we're dealing with today is really a world where I think there's some fear among growers, what's going on in this data world, and I think if we have a governing board at the cooperative, I'm hoping this continues to grow, I think you'll see that really taking hold. We have 41 states covered, about 1,400 members. And out of that, I would say there's 10,000 growers that have talked to me in the last 5 years, have tremendous interest, and when the platform is up and fully functional, you'll see those growers come in to help us. I want to talk about today the opportunities, the challenges, and literally the innovations in agriculture. I could focus on GISC, but I want to talk about what I've been able to see in the last few years. And as I say that, the opportunity is real. Ag 2.0 and Ag 3.0 is here, and we're seeing some things happen now around the Internet of Things. There's a lot of challenges to creating adoption in agriculture, and they're due to the fact that I've had a lot of tools created for me, and many of them I don't need. They don't solve any of my pain points. They look cool. They cost a lot of money, but I'm looking for things I can actually put into the farm, I can implement, and then I can use to collect data. I would say that so far the value has not exceeded the maximum cost that's been wanted for some of these things. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I think there's also fear on the part of the grower not understanding what's going on. You'll be interested in Mr. Jansen's testimony about something called the Transparency Evaluator that I think is very vital to the industry. The other thing I'd say is time factors. Farmers are caught up in prioritizing and reprioritizing their time on a daily basis. So when they're collecting data, it has to be more on an automated fashion. It has to be autonomous. They're not going to go in at night and spend 3 hours entering data, actually about seed varieties and those sorts of things. They're through at the end of the day. So we'll be able to use new technology that you see coming onto the forefront to be able to automatically or semi-automatically collect data. There's been a lot of ag hype, and it's been promises that have went on around ag tech companies and hundreds of millions of dollars that have went in, and yet they haven't solved our problem. So money hasn't quite been the issue. Ownership issues there. I'd love to sit with any of you and talk about that, but the ownership of the data, it's a critical issue. And I have groups today tell me, Billy, your co-op, your members, you can't own your data. I mean, that's ludicrous to me. What do you mean I can't own my data? You're going to go tell a small business owner he can't own his data? That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Just because I use a certain piece of equipment, I can't own the data. So I'm hung up on I'm going to own my data off my cotton farm. And that way I can do things with it. Now, I may share it with third parties so I can get value. Then there's a concern about disruption in the industry. There's no doubt we have disruption going on in the industry, and I think that creates fear among the industry players. So we've got to literally stop the fear among the industry players so they feel like that we can move forward. I want to hit a few points before I run out of time here, and those are, how could you help us? I mean, one problem we have is we need to make sure that we have the rural broadband, the connectivity in place, and that's a place this committee could really play. And so I'm going to ask you to really think hard as you're making those investments into the USF fund, those sorts of things. We have to have them because we need speed. I'm going to tell you, if these millennials want their food to talk, and they do, they want traceability. The only way we're going to make it talk is to actually have connectivity all the way back to the field level. So keep that in mind. People are moving to town, but the land's never going to move, so we need the connectivity back. It's not so much for the residents, so it'll help, telemedicine, all those things, but it's so that we can use it on the farms. Brilliant. I want to wrap up by talking about on the challenges, something Ken Zuckerberg said. Ken is the head of research for Rabobank. And in a statement, he said, we believe that a standardized system is necessary to drive farmer adoption of digital agricultural services. Yet without a common data platform and operating systems, it's unlikely that growers or their vendors providing precision farming services will fully be able to capture it. So I'd say this, lastly, we're working with a lot of companies from big ones like IBM and the Weather Company, great things that we can innovate and bring right in, to groups like Farm Mobile and their PUC, to groups like IDM and her reporting tool that you're going to hear about. These things are there. We just got to integrate them, get them back to the farmer. So thank you for what you do for the American farmer. I'm so appreciative of how y'all build and create and protect the clue layer and all those things that you do around Section 1619. Thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Tiller. Very well said. Mr. Jansen, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Nolan, and members of the subcommittee. My name's Todd Jansen. I'm president and attorney of Jansen Agricultural Law, LLC, which is a law firm based in Indianapolis, Indiana. And we serve the needs of farmers, agribusiness, and also ag technology providers. You're going to hear a lot today about agricultural data and this movement of data from on-farm into cloud-based platforms. Yield data is a good example of that. In the past, farmers always kept this data on their farms, and now we're seeing a real movement towards moving that into third-party platform providers that host this data somewhere else. And together with this movement of data off the farm into third parties have come a lot of concerns. And groups like American Farm Bureau have taken numerous polls about how farmers feel about this, and in my materials I have more detail, but I would summarize it by saying there's really three concerns that I see. One is a lack of trust among farmers in these ag technology providers because they are giving up part of what makes up their livelihood. Second is a loss of control to these companies, and third would be frustrations with the complexity of the legal agreements they're asked to sign. And of course, farmers are no strangers to contracts. They sign things all the time. But now they're being asked to check an I accept box that has some pretty important consequences for what happens to their data, followed by pages and pages of legal type that they may or may not read. So American Farm Bureau really led an effort a few years ago to come up with some ground rules for how companies should use and control ag data. And this culminated in a document called the Privacy and Security Principles for Farm Data, which I refer to as the core principles for farm data. And 37 companies signed on to these and said they were going to implement these core principles in their contracts with farmers. And I was fortunate to be involved in those discussions and be part of that as that document came to be. But just creating core principles isn't really enough, because if companies don't follow these core principles, we need some way to verify that, and so that's one of the things I want to talk about today. Farm Bureau, National Farmers Union, and commodity groups for corn, soy, wheat, soybeans, sorghum, and potatoes all came together and formed an organization that could help verify whether or not companies were being transparent with farmers' data. And what they came up with was a way to recognize those companies after going through a certification process. And this is the seal of approval that this organization provides to companies. It says Ag Data Transparent. And a company that goes through a certification process can obtain use of that on their marketing materials. So the seal really recognizes companies that have been through a certification process. And in order to get the seal, 10 questions are asked of these companies, such as what data are you collecting from farmers, how are you using that data, and then can a farmer retrieve that data back from this company at a later date if they want to. My role at Jansen Agricultural Law is to administer this project, and that's one reason I'm here today. We review these companies' submissions when they fill out these 10-question forms, and we check to see are they really being transparent with how they use farmers' ag data. And I'm proud to say that 8 companies have already been through this certification process and been awarded the Ag Data Transparent Seal. In fact, my Ag Data, Deb Catherella's company, was the very first one to obtain use of the seal. But there are still many more that could go through and become certified, and we hope that they do. We also post the answers to these 10 questions when companies go through the process online at agdatatransparent.com, and in my materials I have a lot more detail about that. And I'll just conclude by saying there's still a lot of work to be done here. There's still a lot of companies that should go through this certification process but haven't as of today. There are still a lot of complex, complicated contracts that farmers are asked to sign, and we can do better as a legal community to address that as well. So I hope that when different companies come before you as a committee, you'll ask them, do you have the Ag Data Transparent Seal? Or if companies have been through the process, you'll congratulate them for achieving that. I'm honored to speak with you here today about this effort and the work that I do, and I welcome your questions later today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Ms. Catherella, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to talk about production agriculture, also known as precision ag, its impact on farmers, the USDA, and crop insurance companies. A key way to help farmers, the government, and taxpayers realize the benefits of precision ag technology is to open the third-party channel and allow producers to report from home. This can be done with commercial software, much like the IRS did in 1986 by allowing taxpayers to use products like TurboTax to report their acres. To me, the most impressive pieces of precision ag are the sensors connected to control systems that run the equipment. This technology allows farmers to achieve better yields, use fewer resources, and reduce the impact on the environment, and ultimately meet world food demand. The adoption rate is increasing. Estimates say that precision ag is already used on 70% of acres. A significant byproduct is data. Farmers and ranchers are collecting all sorts of information, but they're last to the trough to get benefits from their own data. Both FSA and crop insurance agents require farmers to submit an annual report of farm acres, but we don't make it easy for them. Farmers use precision ag start with an electronic version of their planting information, including the exact geographic location of each and every seed in the ground. The current reporting process will see that data translated somewhere between 3 and 8 times, back and forth between tabular data and maps, from electronic to paper and back, all to end up in electronic form where it started, but in government systems. For 7 years, the USDA has been working on a new system to share common information electronically between agencies. For the past 3 crop years, farmers have been able to report the common information just once, either to the FSA or their crop insurance agent, and have that information electronically shared with the other. This is a good step and a direct result of the Acreage Crop Reporting Streamlining Initiative, Accuracy, which was reauthorized in the 2014 Farm Bill. The reporting standards for RMA and FSA includes geospatial data, the map, along with crop and acreage information, but much of that information is not required, which causes 2 problems. First, even if a crop insurance agent collects the geospatial data, and many do, they don't provide it to the FSA because it's not required. And second, FSA and RMA don't exchange that optional data, the maps, with each other, so because the data is incomplete, the other agency doesn't use it. Frustrated farmers must still visit both the FSA county office and their crop insurance agent and share the same information to complete reporting. 3 main reasons for the visit. First, farmers must validate and sign their acreage report in each office. Second, farmers must provide program-specific information to the second agency that wasn't collected by the first agency. And third, farmers need to complete their maps. The USDA knows it's a problem and is actively working on it. In 2015, as part of the Accuracy Initiative, FSA conducted a pilot for electronic acreage reporting using precision ag data. One of the things the pilot tested was allowing farmers to use third-party commercial software to use their acres. Independent data management using MyAgData was selected to test that channel, and the pilot was an overwhelming success. MyAgData was a bridge because it included words, numbers, and maps. Not just the required data, but also the optional data, and one report could be used for both FSA and RMA. Because the data was more precise, participants reported an average of 4.7% fewer acres. That means a lower insurance premium for the farmer, decreased premium subsidy funded by taxpayers, lower indemnity for crop insurance companies and the RMA, and a reduction in claims because yield was not diluted across unplanted acres. Think of the numbers with expanded use. If 25% of the acres were reported using a grower's actual field boundary, and the average reported acres were 4.7 lower, producer premiums and taxpayer subsidies could be reduced by up to $179 million annually. That's a conservative number, but $179 million is a reasonable number to expect with 25% of acres. And that's only insurance premium. What are the savings on indemnities? What if this also applied to farm programs? Again, just using map tools to do reporting changed the agency's visit length from hours to minutes, and despite the success, the third-party channel remains closed. USDA can accept the standard. They share it between agencies today. Both FSA and RMA understand the benefits, and the FSA union supports it. All that's required are minor system changes. Farmers plant fields. Let them report what they plant. It's more accurate. It saves time and money for farmers and the agencies, and it takes taxpayer dollars. Complete, accurate data is the lifeblood of farm programs, crop insurance, and conservation programs. The data is already being collected. Let's use it. Thank you.
Well done, Ms. Catherella. Mr. Royce, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today. I appreciate Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate the opportunity to be at the table and not on the menu, at least for today. My name's Roger Royce. I'm the founder of the Royce Law Firm. We're a Silicon Valley law firm, full-service firm. I also founded a group about 5 years ago called Silicon Valley AgTech, which has since morphed into the Royce AgTech Innovation Network. And originally, I founded that group to address the problem that Mr. Tiller pointed out, and that's seeing a lot of very smart technologists in Silicon Valley come up with a lot of cool gadgets that nobody cared about. We put the technologists together with the farmers and with the venture capital community to try to make things happen, and we've been pretty successful at that. In our law firm, I represent almost all technology startups. A lot of them are what we call ATPs, agriculture technology providers, a few VCs, but for the most part, the people that are creating the technology that is being used in the field. And I'm here to tell you that we are very interested in anything that will encourage innovation and not hinder it. So I know today that we're going to talk about precision agriculture, especially about data, and it comes down to really three big issues: privacy, security, and ownership. And I hope we have an opportunity to dive into that, because as a lawyer, I can tell you that this definition of ownership is a relatively complex thing. It's not as simple as it might seem, especially when we get into data. And I've been doing this for 5 years in the agricultural community now, and I've heard all these concerns about all these complex legal provisions that have to be negotiated, to which I reply, welcome to my world. This is the way the rest of the world operates. This is how businesses operate. We negotiate these deals. And I would hope to encourage that Congress take a light hand here when it comes to reshuffling economic decks that have been negotiated by the parties. Having said that, I applaud these efforts to create standards and to create transparency and certification, but let's keep in mind that not all data is created equal, and all of these agreements will have to be customized to some extent. Now, a couple of things I do want to mention. We do have some law here. We have Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair and deceptive practices. I acknowledge it's not likely to be applied in an agricultural setting. Hopefully, somewhere down the road, the USDA may be empowered or enabled to enforce provisions similar to the FTC Act. I've heard some discussion about applying principles similar to HIPAA and Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which require privacy, disclosure, and security on collectors of data in healthcare and in financial services. Having suffered through Gramm-Leach-Bliley in my practice, I don't think that's appropriate in the agricultural setting. I do think we can take some instruction from the securities laws. I do a lot of securities financings, and securities is about disclosure. And I think a lot of what we're agonizing over here could be solved with very good disclosure rules. In sum, again, I hope that Congress treads lightly on this. I hope that other than enabling the USDA to perhaps enforce some standards and remove bad actors from the market, I really hope that we will continue to respect the idea of freedom of contract as a lawyer, and to allow the market to sort this out and to let the industry work on these standards. So with that, I think I'm going to cede the rest of my time, and I welcome your questions.
Well done, Mr. Royce. I appreciate you being here. The chair would like to remind members that they'll be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate the members' understanding. I'd like to recognize myself now for 5 minutes. Mr. Jansen, I'll start with you. You touched on something in your testimony. Farmers have a deep sense of mistrust where data is concerned. The idea of uploading their data into the cloud. And you mentioned that that kind of stems from the fact that there are no laws explicitly protecting that data. So let me ask you, do you think that an independent verification tool like Ag Data Transparent is sufficient to address the concerns of farmers that they have? Or do you think Congress should look into developing data protection standards in the future?
I think that we are definitely, through the Ag Data Transparency Evaluator, we're filling a gap there because we're addressing those farmer concerns, that mistrust. And so if we have widespread participation in the industry, then I feel like we are addressing the farmers' concerns in a way that means that there is no need for any additional legislation that would protect farm data. Now, if the industry ends up looking the other way and not caring about this, and farmers continue to express mistrust in the future, then I think it is definitely worth taking another look about whether or not there is something that could be done to improve that situation.
Mr. Tiller, your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually agree. I actually agree. I'm listening to Todd, and I'm thinking about what Mr. Royce said, and you know, I do think that farmers are astute businessmen, and I think if they will take the time through the knowledge they'll gain through things like the Transparency Evaluator, they will make contracts that make sense. And if I want to barter, I've always stood for farmers if they knew what they were bartering. If I'm bartering my data for tools, I would never want to take that away from them, because I know farmers that do understand it, and they say, I don't mind putting my data in an aggregated format. In other words, it'd be anonymized, my name's off of it to be part of a benchmarking set when I get something in return. So, you know, all I could say to end it up is I just want to be careful that I don't, even with the cooperative and trying to understand ownership and all these issues, I create a world where we can't be innovative. Because sometimes innovative does create running out on the bleeding edge a little bit. And so that's where I'd stand on that. I'd pretty much agree with Todd. Excellent.
Let's talk about actual application of technology and how we can use data, you know, in a hands-on way. Mr. Tiller, Mr. Royce, Texas, California, both of you having water problems, maybe different kinds of water problems, but water problems. How does big data factor into the better use of irrigation, managing finite water resources? I'll start with you, Mr. Royce.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, we know about water problems out in California. And the technologies that I'm seeing a lot of technologies around water that are attacking the problem from ways that are highly innovative and imaginative and sometimes unbelievable. But with respect to big data, I think that the tools now, the sensors are at the plant level, and we had heard a little bit about precision farming earlier, and I think we're seeing the ability to provide some real conservation through these technology tools. Again, highlighting why broadband is so important. It's important to note, by the way, that the technology has moved, that I've seen, to where each sensor is its own internet user. In other words, it's not like a Christmas tree. It's not daisy chained. It's each sensor has to load up to the cloud. That requires a tremendous amount of internet access. But through these sensors and through being able to provide just the right amount of water in the right place at the right rate, we're seeing data being used to reduce water usage and address our drought problem.
Thank you. Mr. Tiller?
I'd add a couple of things there, and I'm total agreement with what he's bringing up, but I spent a decade also as an ag lender. So profitability is everything in the end. And so what I would say is it's not as much, it is about water use, but I can see farmers understanding profitability better and even changing crops, growing different things, being able to use their water in different ways if they had the data to help them understand what's the most profitable crop on this piece of ground. And maybe I don't have a full pivot or circle of cotton. Maybe that 130 is now 60. What do I do with the other 70 acres? Those sorts of things, data can help you understand.
Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member Nolan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got one question, and I'll yield to my colleagues here. And it's this: as ag data improves and it's become more useful to farmers, there appears to be a widening gap among farmers as well that have access to this technology and those who don't. And, you know, oftentimes some of the best producers in the world, you know, are a mile or two apart from one another, as opposed to downtown where, you know, every 50 feet there's a user. It makes it a little easier to financially for businesses to provide those services. So to be sure, as these technologies continue to grow, those who have access to it will grow and prosper, and those who don't will suffer, even though they may very well be among our greatest producers. So how do you expect the cost of getting these technologies to all the farmers? How do you expect those costs to get down? And what ideas or suggestions do you have for us to consider for getting those costs down to an affordable level where all of our farm producers will have access to them? Thank you. Whoever, step up. Tell us what you think.
I'll share a few thoughts, but I want to make sure I leave time for the other panel. You know, that's sort of a vision of the cooperative, right? I mean, that's what we would be about, making sure all producers had access to the technologies that's developed in a fair and reasonable cost mechanism. It can be, some of the price points of some of the best tools have been too high, but I got news for you. The adoption of those has been very low. I mean, it looks like there's been adoption, but even among some of the biggest growers, not what you would think. They're going to have to bring the price point down to prove the value even there. So I would say I really think innovation and technology and broadband is actually going to be very helpful for a grower with 100 acres. He's going to be able to store data in ways he never could before because of the mobility of the smartphone, being able to carry that computer in his pocket. It takes so little cost of equipment to actually go out and implement these things, and these are very scalable technologies. So I almost see it going the other way. I think every grower will have access to tools to make decisions in ways they've never had it before. I think these sensors are going to get so cheap. I was looking at some Bluetooth technology that sensor was $11, and you could utilize these. So that's an example. I actually think it'll go the other way. I'll yield to the other panelists.
Real quick,
Yeah.
however, you know, it's apparent that some of the companies look at this and they say, well, you know, I got a customer every mile and a half, 2 miles. I'm not going to invest in that. And they're not investing it in many cases. So you're right. The technology will lower the cost and increase the benefits and whatnot. But if you don't have the technology, so how do we make sure we get it to everyone?
You're saying that what are you calling technology? I'm going to tell you.
I'm broadband. I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. Now, there you go. I'm in total agreement with you there. Most of the farmers, I'm amazed, even with age, carrying the smartphone. I've seen this happen. 4 years ago, I could be in a meeting and you could carry it on. It doesn't matter what the age group. I can't carry on the meeting unless I ask them, can we all silence our phones? I never thought that'd be an issue because of the age of the farmer. So we have it, but you're right. Connecting that and being able to stay connected, it is a criteria that's to really meet. If we're gonna have a gap to feed the world. If we don't close that gap by providing that infrastructure, well, that's something that is going to be missing. So yeah, I do agree with that. That's a kind of a third-party touch to the things I talk about. I don't develop that, but I have to have it.
Do you see an investment by the federal government in broadband expansion and infrastructure as being something we should consider?
You know, what is driven out the rural growth of telecommunications all this time has been the support of the RUS, the Universal Service Fund, and that mentality. I don't know why we can't keep doing what we're doing. I mean, I know I was involved with the telecommunications for over 20 years, served on a cooperative telecommunications board. Some of the RUS permitting that's required to get the loan that you have to do even before the loan is ready to be made and the cost involved, I think if some of that could be looked at, it'd be much easier to get there. So I think there's a lot of things that you guys could do from the committee to actually help build that out. You could be the catalyst to really keep that moving.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, my time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, listen, I was watching the clock there, so I don't want to cut you off. Mr. Abraham, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Royce, what are the protections in the agricultural sector for data, and how do they compare to other businesses as far as protection of data?
Yeah, so it's commonly said that there really is no law of farm data. There are general rules around data. There's no federal law of farm data at this point. In California, where I'm from, we have state law that protects the privacy of what we call personally identifiable information, which could apply to farm data, doesn't always. But most of the time, farmers are going to have to rely on the law of trade secrets. And as you know, we now have a federal trade secret law. But trade secret is a little tricky. all right? It's not automatic for farm data. I mean, the information has to be proprietary, has to be valuable, has to be secret, and the owner has to take steps to keep it secret. So it's very easy for somebody to lose trade secret protection for this data. So the way that it's commonly protected these days is through contract. I mean, and that's why I think we're having a lot of these discussions, is because these contracts can be relatively complex and involved.
Thank you. Mr. Tiller, you said in your testimony, your written testimony, which I actually read, that all growers will be impacted by the information revolution, and I totally agree with that. We grow more cotton on my farm this year than we've grown in the last 10 years. What will be the biggest impact of those farmers that don't invest in the information revolution?
You know, I just think it's just very difficult to compete. I mean, I've never liked to think of myself as competing against my neighbor, because I'm competing in a world market, cotton prices, it's a global economy. But in truth, as I do, there's a limited amount of land and growers are trying to rent that land. The most efficient producer is going to do the best job of creating the yield off that farm. I think that the benchmarking that's there today, if we're not using data, I mean, look at the varieties. Look what's happened in cotton, as an example, in the last 10 years. I'm amazed. I mean, I have to, you know, I do cringe when I pay some of these technology fees, but in truth, I have the best varieties I've ever had. Now, do they compensate for the difference in a $100 bag of seed and a $400? It's difficult. I do the math this year in a very rough cotton year, and I'm questioning about what I've got in the field. But if we don't continue to understand and be able to relate to those varieties and understand I should put this variety on this soil in these water conditions, I mean, I'm not going to be as profitable as I can, and then I will be not as self-sustaining. I think data helps us be more self-sustaining, so I can look to myself to help myself be shored up, and I can look to insurance when I have weather-related events that I have no control over, but I can control what variety I have in the field. Yeah, that's an example.
Yeah, I mean, knowledge is power, and knowledge is money in the farming community. So thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize Ms. Bustos for 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for our panel members for being here today. Mr. Royce, your testimony, which I read in advance, was one of the most fascinating agricultural piece of information that I've read in a very long time, but very impressive group of people here, so thank you so much. My district starts in central Illinois and covers the entire northwestern part of the state of Illinois. Ag is our #1 economic driver, so I'm very, very interested in what you're talking about today. I want to tell you a really quick story. We have a brand new company that started in a town called Galesburg. It's called Integrated Precision Agriculture, and what they've done is they've taken the unmanned aerial vehicles and they are using that for spraying and surveying crops. But what happened was they go to the State Department of Agriculture and they encountered this issue where the State Department of Agriculture struggled to understand the business needs. And so they pointed out that in order to get their pesticide license, they didn't know if they were sure of what kind of training they needed. Did they need ground training or did they need aerial training? And so I just bring that up to say, you know, there's some struggles here with new technology and how we're going to move forward. But I think it's a story that illustrates that, you know, what do we need to deal with in government? And so my question really is aimed at all of you, maybe a couple questions. So with regard to data and analytics, how can the federal government not only remain flexible, but also help usher in new technologies? So that's question #1. And is there a role for the USDA staff on the ground or our university extension programs? Anybody can take that first, and nobody needs to repeat what the person ahead of them said, but whoever would like to address that first, and then we'll just kind of go through the list. And you've got an Illinois connection, right?
I grew up in Illinois.
Then you go first.
All right. I'll take that. I moved out of Illinois when I was 16, though, so.
Okay, then you get moved.
All right. Wasn't my choice.
No, go ahead. All right.
All right.
You're all right.
In terms of ag data and analytics and how the USDA can provide a role, a big part of it is providing best management practices for farmers. And I'll use an example that impacts the central sands of Wisconsin as well as northern Illinois. With potatoes grown in sandy soil, they're typically irrigated, and if you use the data collected on the sensors, and it's a combination of sensors. It's the sensors that understand the nitrates coming through the soil to know when you need to apply your fertilizer, your pesticide, or, I mean, if you apply it right after or right before a rain, it's going to go right down through to the place. It's not going to affect the top 8 inches in water growth. So county extension and county offices, specifically on the NRCS side, can definitely help farmers understand data, available options, and what farming practices they need to use. And I'll couple that with add EQIP dollars to, in the case of irrigated potatoes in sandy soils, add EQIP dollars to help the producer pay for what could be a $50,000 investment in technology. But for potatoes, if you manage them correctly, your no stores go from 8 truckloads to 1 truckload if you manage irrigation. So there's a whole lot of benefits if there's the right research study and best practices that a farmer can use, plus funding to help them get that technology in place. So that's one example.
Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add?
I do. You know, it's an interesting thing from the standpoint of the tech providers that I work with, is they're always very surprised. That example you just gave, I've got 100 like that, to find out just how highly regulated agriculture is. And we run into walls all the time. We run into business models and business plans that just don't work because of that. I love the idea of education. It'd be nice to see some coordination possibly, but I don't know that I have any answers other than that. But to say that you put your finger on what is a real issue in this area, and something that, I don't know if I'd say it's stifling innovation, but it's one of those challenges we have to work through.
I want to make one last statement. You did mention the extension and the land-grant universities, and I'm going to tell you, when I first started farming 35 years ago, they were unbelievably relevant, and they still are relevant because they're the only agnostic view we may get. I think that digital agriculture will give them a new way to actually make their data visible, and so I'm hoping that they can embrace that. They may need funding to do that, but I know it'll be helpful because they're not selling me anything. And to have them give me a view of the seed varieties or the secret recipes I should be using versus me trying to decide or have some company selling me something, trying to tell me. So I would definitely like y'all to continue in that realm too.
That's a great point. And with that, I am out of time. Thank you very much.
Gentlelady yields, and I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate y'all coming in today and sharing your expertise and your testimony. Some of the questions I have, you've touched on a little bit, but I just want to make sure I understand it. But before I do, I was raised on a farm, corn and soybeans, beef cattle, until I was 21. Then I joined the Air Force for 30 years. And that transformation over that 30 years is just incredible. When I was 20 years old, driving on a tractor disking, my main concern was finding an AM radio station and trying to find a good baseball game or something to keep me amused. Today we have GPS on almost every piece of equipment. Our combines are pumping out maintenance data all over, yield data. Our irrigation systems know what part of the fields need more concentration than others. I was just at a ranch with 75,000 head of cattle. Every trough was computerized, every water tank. And based on the age of the cattle, different blends of feed. And it was all, and mainly computerized. Every head of cattle, they had to, analyze. So to maximize the output for each head of cattle. I just find it incredible where we've gone. So I clearly see a need for broadband and big data. And I've seen different estimates, what's going to cost to fully put this out in our rural community. Does any of you have a good estimate of what it will cost in the end to really do a rural broadband system for our country? Big question. What's the cost? So I haven't seen a good estimate.
I do want to say this. I wouldn't tackle that one, but back in the day when I was sitting on a telecommunications board, when internet was new, we took a poll of the board. We said, who's going to want this? And I can remember some of the older guys on the board. And I was one of the guys who said, well, I want it. We thought out of the 1,800 line subscribers that maybe 100 would want it. Look what happened today. They all want it. And they don't want what? They don't want that little pipe carrying 2,400 baud. They want a big pipe. So what it's going to cost today, it's hard to say because technology is going to keep wanting more. It's going to have to feed the beast. But if we want to be effective, efficient, and productive, we've got to do that. So I don't know the cost, but I know it's necessary.
I just think it's probably good to start big picture. What is the cost to get broadband out there, and then we could strategize how to get there. Now, you touched on this a little bit. What can we do in the Farm Bill to make some progress there? And you touched on it a little bit, but I just want to make sure we have clarity. And is there a way to partner with states and local governments and private industry? Because obviously people are going to make money on this as well, so it shouldn't be totally a federal cost. But any thoughts on that? And I just open up to the floor because I'm earnestly seeking questions here or answers.
Perhaps grants to State Department of Agriculture so that, you know, I know like in Indiana, we always hear about rural broadband and the need for that. And, you know, perhaps with some incentive money in the future Farm Bill, that would be enough to push those states to invest. Yes. So, and I don't know the cost either of what this would be to make America's farms connected, but I have to think when you look back in history, every major investment we've made in rural infrastructure has paid dividends for generations. Rural water, rural electric, roads. So I think this is the next big one.
If we get the broadband put out, I don't foresee that changing as much. The applications writing within it will change, clearly. So if you get the infrastructure in, I think getting to your point, Mr. Tiller, that the applications within it will change. But we need to get the infrastructure in place. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do it. And I don't know if it's strictly a private endeavor or if there's a partnership there. I think there should be probably some kind of partnership.
The USF fund, that has been a private-public partnership all this time. I remember back from the day when I was on a phone board from '86 to really up to 2004. It's needed. I mean, that is that private-public partnership that goes on to make those things work. Bringing lending in different ways through RUS, through the different funding mechanisms. I think that's the way you do it. I don't think the government would just go out and say, how do we take that? I think it would be these private partnerships.
I'll just close. When I get feedback going around, I'm from the Omaha district, so I have a county and a half, more urban and suburban. We have some farms on the west and north side and southwest and so forth, but we have huge agri-industry, a lot of processing, commodities, and I mean, transportation. But I get out a lot in Nebraska to learn on this. And number one issue is affordable crop insurance. Hear it all over. 2, foot and mouth disease concerns, what would happen, having an insurance plan there. Infrastructure, which is tied to broadband, is probably the 4th issue I hear. So I think that's a common thing I hear. So anyway, thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Plaskett, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I wanted to ask a couple of questions. I think we've really had a really good discussion on both sides of the aisle about this issue, really coming at this from really a bipartisan manner and how we can address the issues of broadband in rural area. It's interesting because yesterday the committee held a hearing about innovations in specialty crop industry, but much of the discussion today is around commodities. Crops. And so one of the question I have, and this is to any of the witnesses, how can technologies that you work with help fruit and vegetable growers? And are there unique benefits of data technology and the discussion we have about increased broadband technology for specialty crops?
You know, I would like to just offer one of the comments one of the panelists made. It's very true, is these technologies really do translate. And we see a lot of tech that originates in California, and especially crop area, and almost immediately it's across the country, it's out in the commodity crops. In a way, my viewpoint is that these are technologies that are going to be useful across a lot of different crops, especially the data.
What I would add to that is production agriculture, your row crops, is very different than your fruits, nuts, and trees in terms of how I'd apply technology. If I were looking at fruits, nuts, and trees, I'd focus more on your aerial imagery. I mean, the technology is such that you can count the number of tomato plants in a field very accurately using the automation, whether it's 3 to 5 meter imagery or drones. So I think the application of technology will vary depending on the crops, but I also agree you can try to cross, but you know you're not going to put a tractor in an area where you're counting your trees and your fruit on those trees. So aerial imagery and some of those kinds of things are far more expensive.
Yeah.
than the production agriculture, but there are a lot of pretty neat things that are happening, I'll call it in garages and homes and those kinds of things, but not a lot that, as Billy said, is good for mainstream specialty growers.
I know that, you were talking before about fertilizer and the time in which to put that. I mean, I think that for specialty crop growers, that's an issue as well. Yep. In the Virgin Islands, we go from drought to heavy rains, and having technology to help the farmers support irrigation issues, which are really important for them, and how to regulate that would be something that, this technology would be really supportive of as well.
Yeah, and there you may want to start with sensors, soil sensors and moisture flow as a pretty simple internet-connected device to collect a lot of data.
I know that our extension, the University of the Virgin Islands, the extension is doing a lot in terms of sensors. But the technology probably isn't going to come from the extension. It's going to come from other high-tech places, and then being able to apply those or something that would be really helpful. So my other question is for Mr. Tiller. We were talking about cooperatives. You noted that cooperatives are a tried and true method for farmers to come together to find greater market power. And you've been doing some work with farmers to do this in ag data market. Could you explain how the Grower Information Service Cooperative is positioned to draw value for farmer market members, and how would patronage return be generated from aggregated farm data?
That's a good question. And the reason it's a good question is today it hasn't been done. So I always tell growers, let's be simple. Let's start out with, I call it collect and store. Let's don't get too far down the road, because until we get the data in a place where we can do something with it, because I always sort of chuckle when this farm group says, we're doing all this stuff with data, and I always say, what data? They probably don't have much data because it's been very difficult to bring in and collect. So we would want to use the platform initially so farmers would have a place to store that data, and then they could begin to share that with their agronomists, with people that worked with their data, just doing the simple, not looking at big data initially, doing simple things to create small data that would be actionable for their farms. An example would be in the vegetable industry, et cetera. We'd want to work there, and here's why. I have groups from all over the world that call me about this data cooperative. And I've said, I can't see why we can't franchise the same idea, same platform to create data communities. Because if you only have 80 or 90 growers, you don't really want to set up a cooperative, wherever that's at, and try to get into all the technicalities and the cost. But set up a data community, and we're trying to work with some groups right now of how that might look and be managed on a similar platform to ours. So today I would say collect, store, but we have to analyze. Stored data is not worth to anything to the farmer if we don't make a decision with it. I've sort of reached a point where sometimes in the industry, there are groups say, really, we don't want it shared outside of here because we don't really want anything else done with it. That doesn't work for a grower. I've got to be able to make decisions with that data.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like a couple comments on broadband, the need in the rural area. Absolutely, and definitely. I don't know if it's if that means broadband means more fiber, more cell towers. I don't know how that interrelates, but I can tell you, I work in one of my local companies in my district, and fiber has come down. It's cheaper now than coaxial cable, and this cable company, it's a privately owned company in several of my counties, is running fiber to every residence on their customer base, and the technology, how that all, how it all works. I had an interesting morning that day. I learned a lot, but I wanted to, Mr. Teller, your cooperative that you started, you say you got 1,400 members. When Mr. Royce talks about privacy, security, and ownership, how do you, what's your cooperative rules? How do you handle it? Because you'll be like the major scale if we cover it nationally, I guess.
Well, we're still learning, but that's why I'm so staunch around that. I appreciated Mr. Royce's comments that ownership is a complex issue. But when I'm talking to a grower, they want to know that their idea is within the contractual rights of the co-op, they own the data that's placed in there. They would, they could be part of aggregated data sets and they'd be anonymized, but they would own that data. And they could take their data at any point. That's some things we've worked with.
What was that?
They could take their data. It's portable. Okay. They could move it. Now, what could they do with it? That's the problem today. A lot of groups tell us, well, you can take your data, but if you can't do anything with it when you leave, and you really can't take it out in a format that you can really put it into something else, you haven't left with a lot. But these are things that, the beauty of this is just a group of growers deciding what they want to do. If other growers want to join in that effort along those rules of understanding that, and it's an evolving thing. Yeah. So where we're at today won't be where we're at in 2 or 3 years. I believe we'll have data sets that will be valuable to growers around benchmarking within the next 2 to 3 years.
And you have 1,400 members. I'm kind of assuming they're all different levels of their abilities.
Are all different crops, all different levels.
Well, I mean, levels of being able to collect data and how they're using the data, right? I mean,
yeah, I've got farmers that join the co-op that literally might have one tractor on their farm out of 5 that really are using GPS. And I've asked them, in the conversation, what made you want to join the co-op? Even some that don't even have that, they're looking for the co-op to even be an educational force for them. I don't know what to do around data. We've always solved problems in ag, kind of joining together. So there was a thought around that we've had members join at that level. And then I wish the gentleman from Nebraska was still here. One of my most astute growers, Rourke Paulman, out of Nebraska. I mean, this guy employs more technology. I learn more about how to employ technology when I go to his farm than any place I've ever seen. So my example is, you're right, it's a spectrum, but it's all crops too.
Now, kind of another thought, data is collected, and let's say it's, supplying pesticides, herbicides, or fertilizer, or whatever. What's your thoughts about a government agency being able to come in, for one aspect, a producer could be used as protection because I got the actual records here, blah, blah, blah. But the other side, say the EPA or wherever, is that conversation ever come up?
That conversation comes up a lot. You're from Ohio, and I've said you may know John Fulton, Ohio State. Those are conversations we've had with him because he's academia doing research, taking grant money. I'm very concerned that when there's grant money involved, it might be foiable, and a grower might not want that data out there. Not doing anything wrong, just wants his privacy looked at in that way. So at the co-op, we think about that. So we've never looked to take grants or bring in any dollars like that. We've used private money to fund us because we do want to be a separate database owned by growers where they own this individual.
Well, that's one aspect. From that aspect, I'm thinking about another aspect of being able to come in and I guess subpoena or search warrant.
Well, I guess that could happen let's use some examples of things that are out in the tech industry like Box, Dropbox. These places have got stored data, so if that could happen to us, it could happen to them. I think that's a much larger issue than in ag because we've tried to remain totally separate and private for those very reasons. We've had growers concerned about that, to be honest. I mean, what would keep EPA from wanting to just subpoena my records around? I'm in a watershed, and if we stored them here. And those are things that we're trying to work through now as we talk to growers, so there's a lot of caution being put there. But at the same time, there's so much to be garnered when farmers are controlled and understanding that data so that we can do the right things. We are good stewards of the land.
Well,
we want to do the best.
I agree. I think it's a question we got to be able to maybe answer some of these questions so farmers have more confidence to do this. So I yield back. Exactly.
Gentleman yields. Dr. Dunn recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So let me start by saying I'm not a farmer, unlike General Bacon, who is sitting here to my right. And I didn't grow up on a farm, and I'm fascinated by the sheer penetrance of information technology on today's farms, and how you hear about rural broadband and you think, oh, people want TV out in the small towns too. No, that's not what they're talking about. So I'm really, really impressed. We have a very agrarian district, a lot of farmers, 300 miles across. It's the #1 economic activity in my district, and I'm learning a lot about farming very quickly. So let me ask Mr. Tiller, I'll start with you. First question, what happens to the people, and there's large swaths of my district that do not have broadband. What happens to these farmers who just at this point in time and maybe going forward for a while don't have access to broadband?
You know, there are ways to collect data without the broadband. You can actually store it on the phone, sync it later, but those are not.
Walk the fields and.
That's right. You do exactly what you've been doing. But my whole point, that's why we have to get there.
But they can't compete as well, and they like to export too. I mean, we have some pretty big farms.
That's right. So it's something y'all are you need to address. I mean, I'm speaking for those farmers. I know they want better access to the technology of broadband. It's that simple.
So one thing, I have spent a fair amount of time in the space launch programs, and I can tell you they want to put a lot of low Earth orbit satellites out there that they say will cover these areas. I don't know, and we've also spent a lot of time trying to get fiber out there. In fact, one of our space launch consortiums was making fiber in space for telecoms and then sending it back to Earth to plant in the ground. It's a confusing world. I do want to address the gentleman from Ohio's question about privacy of data, though. I think that's really interesting. So we get it that you can own your data, but your data has already been shared with some big growers consortium, perhaps, or not. But is your data private from, let's just say, the IRS?
Well, it is at this point. I mean, you would know that better than me. I mean, y'all are making the rules. At this point, I haven't had those.
So that's a rule that would interest you?
That's what I'm going to rely on y'all to actually not protect just the farmers. You're going to want to protect everyone from those sorts of concerns.
What are the privacy issues in agriculture, the secret issues? Are there secret competition issues? Or?
That's never really the concern. I mean, farmers, if right now they're not even putting the data in a warehouse where it could be used, and I find that privacy is a concern. Most of them, it's not the greatest concern. They want to know if I want to share it, who can I share it with? They want to make sure they control those aspects. So we're trying to really build a platform where they'll have that control. And, the main concern farmers have is how easily can I get it there? And what value do I really have once it's there? Is there anything that can be done with it? Those are things that are today. They weren't greater 5 years ago, but today, that's the question. Most of them because they've seen all the social media, how things go. So they're more comfortable around data, but they want to know what value. If I put effort and time and money, what do I garner when I get to the end of the day?
Well, I will say in closing that no conversation with farmer in my district ends without some comment about access to broadband, and that, of course, is much more acute out in the farm country, and we want to be sure we address that in the Farm Bill, and we want to be sure that you help us address it properly. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, and I recognize the gentlelady from Delaware for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and excuse me for having to step out for a moment. Let's see. This issue is one that's probably really important and exciting to me, especially in my home state of Delaware. I got an opportunity to go around with some of our farmers and use some of their technology and see what's happening. And so hopefully my questions that I'm interested in haven't already been asked, but one of the things that I was interested in is I heard as I walked in about the issue of broadband, and right now there seems to be, just like in the past with the digital divide, you have sometimes those who get access to new technologies and others who don't. And so I'm curious about whether you think the cost of some of this technology, like when we can expect to see it become more available to a broader group of individuals, whether they're farmers that have great big companies versus the family farmer. Can you talk a little bit about accessibility and kind of bridging that divide?
I will jump in just for a minute on one part of this, and that is I'm seeing that the cost of the devices going down tremendously over the last 5 years. It's becoming very affordable and accessible, and you're absolutely right. Cost is a very big issue with farms, a lot of which are very low-margin businesses. And cost was a gating factor early on, but I think that problem is being solved, at least at the device level. With regard to the federal cost, the government cost of building the superhighways and the access, that I don't know.
I wanted to add that, I think we're still at a place where farmers are trying to sort out what is the return on investment when they upload their data to all of these cloud-based platforms. And, right now most farmers are still paying to store their data in the cloud, but I think the long-term hope is that eventually that value proposition flips and we start to see farmers getting paid to upload their data because the companies are getting so much value out of that it is worth returning some of that investment back to farmers. And so that will bring the cost of these services down for farmers as well.
Gotcha. When you gave your testimony earlier, I heard different things, about trust, about fear, some of the different concerns about who owns the data. And I guess my question would be, we've seen that the technology has been, growing, but we've also heard some of the challenges. Can you each identify what you would say is the one major concern that you have in making use of the new technologies? If you had just one thing that really is that major concern, what would it be? And we can start with Mr. Royce.
Well, okay, I would like to come back to the privacy issue because I want you to imagine a scenario where somebody walks into my office and they say, I've got this new technology. It's going to sit on a drone and it's going to gather yield data of a farm, or maybe financial data. I'm going to figure out how profitable that farm is. And then I'm going to take that data and I'm going to go sell it to the companies that sell the inputs to the farm because they know how profitable the farm is. And by the way, in California, a lot of the farmland is leased. Maybe I'll go sell it to one of that farmer's neighbors so he can come and, he knows what that farm is worth. Or maybe I'll sell it back to the owner of the land. So I think there really is a privacy issue here. Now, we deal with that, of course, through contracts and through, in California, we've got this concept of personally identifiable information. But when I hear about trust issues, that's kind of the first thing I think about in this. It's not the only thing, but it is the first thing I think about.
I've got 50 seconds. So.
Yep. What growers are most concerned with, producers, are two things. One is if they use their precision ag data, the data collected on their tractor for reporting, is the government going to get more than the government is supposed to get? So what's on that card, what's in that data, could be their seed planted in their ground and an as-applied fertilizer application. They only want to share the seed. They don't want to share the variety and the type. If it's corn and it's planted on this field with this parameter, they're happy to share that because it's required. They don't want anything else to go. So the challenge is, how do you enable the use of the data without disclosing more than is required?
Thank you. 9 seconds.
My big concern is that farmers understand the contracts they're signing up for.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I would just reiterate collaboration of all the things we talked about. Going back to when Royce was talking about literally even the drones, let's take it from there even to the data level. If I share data like Todd's talking about with a third-party company, do I understand what's going to happen to that data? Is it going to stay there? Are they going to share it with affiliates? Or are those affiliates going to try to sell things to me based on what they learned?
Thank you. My time has expired.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I recognize the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for sharing with us. Obviously, technology is critical to the continued operation of our farming industry, and of course we've made tremendous strides, and of course y'all been a part of that, and appreciate all your efforts in making these things work. We're working through the Farm Bill, the next Farm Bill, and in the 2014 Farm Bill it was clear that USDA should allow producers or an agent of a producer to report data, including geospatial data, electronically or conventionally, to the department. This provision was designed to reduce administrative burdens and costs for producers. Ms. Is it Catherella? Catherella, sorry. Do you have some insight on why this is not being done?
Yeah, I'm not even sure where to start. First, it's the...
Well, we got 3 minutes and 55 seconds.
Okay. No, I'd say first it's the uncertainty of, well, no, first the farmer doesn't even know it's happening to them. So if you're going into the FSA, or you're going into your crop insurance agent, and the FSA sends the data to crop insurance, and the crop insurance data through their crop insurance company sends the data to the FSA, the producer doesn't know what's happening. They also don't know it's incomplete data, and the whole farming industry is conditioned to have data match. So when they go into the FSA county office and they get their 578 and they report 32.78 acres that equals their CLU, and then they go into their crop insurance acres and report 31.2 acres of insurable acres for their crop insurance, if there's a GAO audit or a compliance or a claim, what are valid acres? Is it the acres that they reported in crop insurance that are probably the acres that they planted in the field, or the acres that they certified in FSA? I mean, there's still so much confusion on the impact to a farmer, the impact on the FSA program. So if I report accurately, do my base acres change? Well, not in this farm bill, but will they in the next one? So
that's why we're talking about it. Again, we're working on the next farm bill.
Yep.
And we need to get this. We need to get this solved. Or any of the panel have any idea how we can solve this?
I'll
issue?
say, yeah, one thing. Let the farmers plant the acres they plant. Let the farmers report the acres they plant. It doesn't have to be farm track field. It doesn't have to be common land unit. And let the government figure out then, if I plant a boundary and it covers 3 CLUs or within 1 CLU, come up with the rules for how to handle that data. Okay. But don't make the government report with boundaries that are set anywhere from 5 to 25 years ago that maximize producer benefits. Let the farmers report what they report, and give the agencies the dollars to be able to adapt the program to collect actual data.
Okay. Thank you so much for your feedback. Any other comments regarding that problem from the other members? All right. As far as I've got just a minute, it's my understanding that the NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, within the USDA is coordinating well with 3D elevation program, a 3DEP. And my question is to everyone on this panel is, how can the USDA best leverage elevation data via these standard mapping technologies such as LIDAR to maximize farm management decisions? Does it go back to this same issue?
You were saying elevations.
Right.
Repeat the question. I had a little trouble hearing you.
It's where the NRCS is service within the USDA is coordinating with the 3D elevation program within the U.S. Geological Survey and the Department of the Interior. In short, 3DEP is a nationwide LIDAR, LIDAR program, and it's enhanced elevation data. And my question is, how can the USDA best leverage that elevation data to make it available?
Well, to make it available, maybe that could be a public data set. I'd love to be able to pull that in to have that elevation data. As tractors are going through the field with the GPS on them, we get elevation data too.
Okay.
So that elevation data, you could actually do a lot to really check where you're at. Deb or one of the others might have a better feel for it. I don't really know the value yet. There's people around me that might, so I don't feel like I could really get.
Well, that's a concern that's been voiced to my office, and I think it goes back with trying to solve this in the next farm bill. And Chairman, I'm out of time. I yield back. Thank you so much.
Gentleman yields. The gentleman from Florida recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. I think the biggest problem that I have is the way it happened in Congress is trying to do 2 or 3 meetings at the same time and reading my way coming here. So I want to thank the committee. I want to thank you all for being here. And I know that you already discussed the issue regarding the lack of broadband. But my question is different. Here in North Florida, there's an issue with the lack of rural broadband and access. Can you elaborate on how the lack of rural broadband hinders the implementation of telemats among farmers and regions? Can anyone?
I just reiterate for you, I mean, what it's boiling down to is this. Everything that's out there that really is trying to stream data through telematics into the cloud is going to need to use the broadband that's out there, the cell signal, or other things that could be put in place. Unless those are there, I think it's going to affect long-term the productivity and efficiency of our farms. And so I think there has to be an effort, because we may not get the private investment because they're not sure of the payback, but once it's there in its entirety, because the problem is if you just do a little area, you're not going to get it, but if it's there in its entirety, and that's where you need the government, I think that's where you create those private-public partnerships with the industry that's out there building telecommunications, so that, because once it's all there, the value to the United States is going to be tremendous. And so I think that's what we have to understand. All this cloud that we talk about, it doesn't have any data unless we bring it from that dirt. It's a sensors stuck in the dirt. We got to get it there. And there's just no way, there's no technology to get it there. I mean, other than me capturing the data off it with a USB stick, going to it, but we'll never implement those technologies. There has to be ease in the automation.
So I'd like to add that there's also, as was mentioned, there are alternatives to broadband to capturing data, but they tend to be labor intensive. And we have one heck of a labor shortage out in California, and we're not going to be able to use. So there's the labor shortage that broadband also helps address, but also the fact that the more we can take humans out of the equation and make this more automated and more machine-based, the more reliable the data is going to be. So there are some ancillary concerns to this.
What I'll add to that is right now it takes a technician to get the data. So I'll use an example of a farm in Illinois. It's all enabled with technology, sensors, everything else, and the only time they're connected is when that tractor ends up back in the shed. They turn on their mobile device and stream that data. So it's all after the fact, and it's there. It's just really hard to get at, and again, takes a technician to figure out how to get the data anywhere. It's complicated, instead of letting the sensors talk to the cloud, which provides the information to the producer.
And I would add as well that it's not just a matter of, some farmers in the United States not being connected and others being connected. I think we should always keep in mind that our farmers are operating in a global market, and other countries are making these investments in rural broadband, so their farmers have a competitive advantage, and we want to make sure that all of our farmers have that same advantage here when they put goods out on the world market.
Very great. And I have a little time, but I wanted to say one thing when you mentioned about California, about the labor shortage. Other countries experience the same kind of problem that California will be experienced by a shortage of the labor market?
Are other countries experiencing? I don't know, but I do know that other countries, we could talk a long time about what's going on in other countries, and we do a lot of work with China, India, and I was just recently in the Middle East, and they are in a race to implement technologies, including broadband, because they don't have the kind of agricultural infrastructure that the United States has. So other countries are becoming very automated very quickly.
Wow, that's amazing. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and echo the sentiments from my colleague, Mr. Lawson. Just too many things happening at the same time. My apologies, especially if I repeat questions or comments that have already been made, and certainly want to thank all the panelists for being here and for your insight. Utilizing data analytics, Billy, we talked about prior to this hearing, is a best practice across all industries. And I don't know that the ag industry, or certainly ag producers, are fully utilizing those, and no telling what the gap is in terms of productivity and efficiency that we can gain. But there's the question of who owns the data. You mentioned that. It's frustrating for you. Why shouldn't the producer own that data? What's government's role in being a data repository? I want the government in a very limited role. I want unleashing the market forces, because I think that's where innovation happens. I don't think it happens a lot in the federal government, but the federal government has a role. Define that for me with respect to data.
I'm gonna keep it simple. I think the role has to remain in the private sector of how we store the data, who owns it, because I think it's going to get too complex. And I really think that most things work best when innovators innovate. And that's what's got to happen here. We can't have rules to make that happen. But I'm gonna say that the role that could really be played is how we interact with land-grant universities, how we interact with research that's going on, and how that data can be used. I mean, farmers are in fear of that becoming foible, and all they're trying to do is help in a research project. That could be something y'all could address. I mean, so that farmers could be part of a research project, help get to the real answers at the bottom, and not get in trouble just because they're trying to help others, because they might not even know they were wrong in what they've done. I've heard stories out of California where somebody was plowing some ground and got into a multi-million-dollar lawsuit or something, and it's all because he shared some data. So that makes farmers fearful. They're like, I'd rather not play at all. So I think the role has to be extremely limited. I think be very cautious. I just caution, just like you said, just a little bit. We might need a little help and guidance. I mean, one thing that, and I don't have an answer how we bring that together. I think we just got to continue to innovate, encourage the producers to really work with groups like ours. If they want to digitally report like Deb's tool there, I think if any way y'all could innovate that, I think there's cost savings to the government out of things like that.
Well, I can only imagine as a bank board member watching the burden and experiencing the burden of data collection that the government puts as a requirement because of deposit insurance and their regulatory role. I can appreciate why some would be very concerned about that, but someone's got to have it. Yeah. And I agree with you. If you're going to innovate and you're going to manage effectively, the co-op idea I think is really a brilliant idea. This is for other panelists, and Billy, please weigh in if you have an idea on this. But you know, as in my role at Texas Tech, trying to bring research to market, ideas, to transfer them to something that will make a difference in people's lives, I think is the value proposition for R&D at the federal government. I'm a big believer in it. I think it's made us competitive, more competitive than we'd be otherwise without that investment. But it is a very difficult endeavor to have early stage technology from government R&D to move through the process. You have to have the good idea that's patentable, marketable. You have to have capital, that's venture capital, angel investors, and other early stage money. And then you've got to have entrepreneurs. So how do we make that a more efficient and a more successful proposition? Because I think taxpayers really get that. You know, that some of this fundamental research, which I believe that basic science is important too, but the applied and the transferred technology out of research, every taxpayer gets that. From the Google to the Gatorade to all these things that have benefited us. Tell me how we improve on that on this side of the ledger.
Mind if I offer a few comments?
Please, yeah.
I know that Mr. Tiller.
And then I'm going to yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Doesn't like it when I use the word disruptive, but I will tell you that I have seen lots of very disruptive things, and just in business generally, that happens mostly at the startup level. I mean, big companies, publicly traded, they have shareholders to report to. They're not likely to swing for the fences like our small startup companies are to come up with some really, truly game-changing technologies. So anything that encourages startup companies, I think, is good for innovation. In my written comments, I submitted a couple of proposals. I know it's not this committee on some tax incentives that I think would go a long ways. In terms of what the USDA can do, this trust issue is a real issue. It's a real thing between the tech companies and the farming community. And what is government's role? I think it should assume that traditional role of removing bad actors from the marketplace in order that we can have an atmosphere of a little more trust. And we've got a good model in the FTC Act. We just don't have an enforcement mechanism that I'm aware of that applies to agriculture. So that is one thing that I think the committee might want to consider.
Gentlemen's time's expired, and before we adjourn, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for any closing comments he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank the panel. It's been very revealing how important technology is for agriculture and the future of agriculture, and our ability to feed the world and to continue to grow and prosper. And I just want to thank each and every one of you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this really outstanding. We get a lot of panels here, but this is one of the really outstanding panels that we've had. And I commend all of our colleagues and anybody interested in food and agricultural policy to take the opportunity to read through their testimony. It's just excellent. Thank you so much.
I thank my friend from Minnesota, and I will close. I just want to share a few observations and thoughts real quick. One of the recurring themes that we've heard, not only in this hearing, but in some listening sessions and prior hearings, was the need for broadband. And obviously that's going to continue to be a recurring theme. So just thinking out loud here, I think we need to identify the key players from a technology standpoint, who can deliver and address changing technologies on the fly, number one. Number two, who has the infrastructure to reach rural America? Identify those. And then third, financing this. How do we do that? How big of a role, as you mentioned, RUS, how big of a role should the government play, or should we be looking at public-private partnerships? But I view this kind of like a three-legged stool. The technology is a big part of it. The infrastructure, access, getting that technology delivered to the folks that need it. And then finally, the third piece of the pie here, the third leg of the three-legged stool, is finance. How do we pay for it? And that's going to be a struggle that we have to work toward collectively. Big data, addressing the concerns, as we've talked about, the privacy concerns, some of the skepticism that is inherent in agriculture, particularly where the government overlap takes place. So the legal, ethical concerns, that privacy issue. And then you mentioned this, Mr. Jansen, it's a marketable commodity. It really is, and so there's value in that data. How does the farmer realize the market potential to help improve his bottom line? And I think there's definitely merit in exploring that and how you can monetize that data while protecting and safeguarding their privacy issues and things of that nature. And then finally, something that didn't come up, but just briefly, I think, Roger, you may have touched on this, and that's drone use and how folks are using that and acquiring data through drones, how they're using this on their farms. Folks are so innovative and creative out there. I've got a group in my district that they're creating drones and different applications so fast that it's 4 months down the road, this one becomes obsolete because they're advancing so quickly on the applications that they're finding for using unmanned aerial vehicles, and becomes an issue with the FAA and FCC potentially. And so these are some things that we have to explore, and big data is at the key and at the heart of that. So I just would associate myself with the comments that Mr. Nolan made. This is a great panel, and we began a conversation here, but we didn't even scratch the surface on what the potential is for big data and how we can plug farmers into it in a more meaningful way. So thank you for being here. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing, the Subcommittee on General Farm Commodities and Risk Management, is adjourned.